Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new episode of Iblis Manifestations Podcast. I'm honored to be once again joined by my friend Kyle Spanswick, aka Naas Alcameth, of Akhlys, Nightbringer, Aoratos and Bestia Arcana. Those of you who have been following the podcast for a while will know that Kyle and I already conducted a podcast back in May last year, which turned out to be one of the most notorious episodes of this podcast thus far. Part of this due to the timing, part of it due to the subjects that we happened to cover at that particular time. But this time around, Kyle came back, and in the old-fashioned Iblis Manifestations way, we had a conversation which was no holds barred and no filters, and it went far deep into the esoteric, as one would have probably expected to hear having a guy like Naas Alcameth guested on the podcast. Of course, a lot of times during the introduction part of the Iblis Manifestations podcast, I tend to give somewhat of a preview of what is going to be discussed on this one. However, on this particular episode, I don't feel that is going to be necessary. And instead, what I'm going to invite you to do is to start from the very beginning of the episode and listen to the entire conversation at your own time and go through the motions with us. If you happen to be new to the Iblis Manifestations podcast, first of all, welcome. We tend to have very deep dive types of conversations and cover very nuanced topics with various different artists, entrepreneurs, and different people who are not necessarily the types of characters that you would see in a mainstream settings. So if you do enjoy our content, it would be extremely helpful if you would support the channel by clicking the subscribe button. I know it sounds like it's not a lot, but it truly does help, and it allows us to create more content like this and bring it to you guys. Of course, there's not a lot like this episode or any of the other ones. Each are unique to their own. However, it is my desired effort to have as many unique artists and as many unique conversations on this podcast as possible. It really is the alternative form of media. And as an addition, my band Trivex recently released a new album titled Eloah Burns Out, Eloah being the singular for Elohim. This album came out via our label Cult Never Dies, and it came out on the 29th of September. And if you wish to support this album, well, first of all, I recommend you to go check it out, listen to it. You can search this on any online platforms. You can also check out the music video for Azrael on YouTube. The links for all of that can be found in the description below. And if you happen to enjoy what you are hearing and wish to support it, then of course you're more than welcome to visit the Trivex Bandcamp page and support the band through that way. And this is also how you will be supporting the Iblis Manifestations podcast as well, as the two are intertwined. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's not really much else that I need to be sharing with you during this introduction. It's all go, and you know it's gonna get fucking deep. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, welcome back, Naas Alcameth, to Iblis Manifestations. All right, and Kyle, Welcome back to Iblis Manifestations. How are you doing, man?
Good, man. Good. Hanging in there, keeping productive as always. So
Fuck yeah. Well, you've definitely been busy. Man, there's so much stuff that's happened since the last time that you were on the podcast, which was, I believe it was May last year when we had the now infamous conversation, I guess, which came out at a came out at a very interesting time back then. Since then, obviously, we've met up a couple of times, saw you guys in London at Cosmic Void last September, and then we even had the honor of sharing the stage with you guys in Germany at Hole in the Sun just a few months ago now. So, tell us, what have you been up to since then?
basically a whole lot of touring over the last year. Pretty much feels like it was nonstop. So, ever since our Euro run with Fides and Versa last year, we've stayed pretty busy. So we did 2 more European runs in that time, and we also did Mexico and Colombia. So, and then just a handful of gigs in the U.S. We did Chicago, and then destroying Texas Fest. So yeah, I've been super busy on the live front. Since then, this last run that we had through Europe, starting in Greece and actually ending in Israel, that actually was a 3-week run, and so I feel like I'm finally just now recovering from that one. So now it's back to focusing on finishing up this album, which is right around the corner. So.
Fuck yeah, that's awesome news, man. I know we actually talked about the new album last time. It was sort of very brief and very vague at the time. It's like, yeah, there's some ideas going. So now, with basically, you can solidly say that, oh yeah, there's gonna be new material coming out.
Yeah, I've already let that one slip elsewhere. So it's been discussed. It's out there. People know that there's a new album coming. So I can't divulge exactly when, nor do I know at this point. But big studio where we're going to do the proper drum recordings and do the mix and master is just a little over a month away. So that's how close we're getting to wrapping this up.
That's fucking great news, man. Very excited to get the whole thing out there, and I appreciate you actually taking the time to do this podcast, because I know that this might be your last one, at least for a while speaking. So let's make the most of it, man. Obviously very excited to see what you've got coming up with Akhlys, and I have to say, since the last time you were on, not to sound condescending, but the band has come such a long way, and it's so cool to see the progression and just seeing like how you've especially conquered Europe at the very least, despite perhaps some minor obstacles, let's say. I think one thing that I really wanted to talk to you about is, I guess a good starting point would be, obviously you mentioned about the tour and ending the tour in Israel. First of all, I think that's something that I'm curious about on a multitude of different levels. So if you can just take me through the experience, what were your thoughts going into it, and obviously there's the reason why this is interesting is because that there's a lot of history there's a lot of both as far as politics, but also religious history. It's a very important, arguably one of the most important geographical locations on planet Earth as far as we know. So what was your thoughts just going into that show? What was the experience of the show, and how did you get on with the whole thing?
So as far as going to Israel, yeah, I truthfully had no fucking idea what to expect whatsoever. Never been to that region of the globe, and nor did I think I probably ever would be visiting there. So I think we were all pretty excited to be able to do that, especially as you said, all the history there, especially the religious history, something that I'm very invested in. So, it's just a lot of these things, of course, from a more adverse side. But, Israel's a very important location in a lot of ancient religions. So yeah, we were really excited about that, and to be able to see like old sites and just have that experience. So we were there actually I think we were there for like 5 days total. So it was actually quite a while. We only played just the Black Knight sorceries the one night, but just how with the timing of the European run ending and when the festival was like, which was kind of cool because it gave us ample time to kind of really live it up over there. But yeah, it was certainly an interesting experience, and of course ended in a very dramatic way, so that none of us could have ever expected.
Yeah, I think you guys summoned it, huh?
Yeah, apparently. Yeah, one of us did.
No, I mean, I'm very glad that, you managed to get away just in time. So many of my friends were there at that time a lot of friends of mine were playing that festival. Some were even involved in it, and some of my friends are actually still there in that country as we speak, and it's a horrendous situation. Yes, yeah, it's a pretty terrible situation, but I mean, how do you feel just walking away from something like that?
Well, it was pretty surreal. Before I went over, I had family members that were expressed concern about me going over there because they were like, hey, it's maybe not the safest place. And I was telling them, actually, you guys have probably a exaggerated view of it. It's fairly safe. So it's ironic that that's what occurred at the end, just the timing. But no, it was really strange because. So all of us in the band, minus Braxis, were on the same flight, and I think that he was on one with Bjorn. I can't remember if they were earlier or later than us, but it was funny because I was kind of bitching about how early the flight was, because I was fucking exhausted. So that's a little bit ironic because so it turns out with the timeline that the attacks would have started about 30 minutes before we took off. So we were probably sitting on the airplane on the tarmac waiting to take off as it occurred. Of course, we had no idea what the fuck was going on at that point. So
right.
Yeah, and then we got into the air, and I was just kind of thinking, well, long flight, when I was awake at that point. So decided to go ahead and just pay for internet. And as soon as my internet connected, started getting all these messages from, our crew, our road crew was still back at the hotel. So first text I got from them was, we just got bombed or we just got rocketed. And so then I was like, oh shit, what the fuck is going on? And they were saying that they were hiding in a stairwell. Apparently the little grocery store, which was literally just it's on the same block, so just a couple of buildings down, took a direct hit and got demolished. So then I started I heard from Bjorn, and he was okay, but I know that they had still people back there on the ground. Mm-hmm. A lot of the bands are still back there, a lot of them at the same hotel that we were at. So it sounds like a lot of people just kind of hunkered down in a stairwell and endured until the next day when they could get out and get to the airport. They did send. I just happened to take some photos right outside our hotel area, just for posterity of just the area, Mm-hmm. And then as they were leaving the next day, they snapped some photos of the same area, and so it's kind of interesting to see the contrast because, of course, it's just destroyed buildings and rubble and chaos. So, but it made for a long flight home because, of course, then as exhausted as I was from the tour, after 3 weeks, you're pretty much fucking done and ready to sleep. But now I've got friends on the ground still in the situation, so I made sure that I was staying awake and staying in contact with them to make sure everyone was okay. So yeah, that was quite a dramatic conclusion to the entire experience. So, and just seeing how it's unfolded since, it's real. It's still, I haven't wrapped my mind around it completely. It's really surreal that we just barely slipped out of there before this major world conflict broke out.
Yeah, absolutely. And who knows what's gonna be the end of it. But I mean, as far as just that particular event, I mean, I had Christopher Necros Horns on here, and he took us through the details of how it was, because him and some of the Darvaza guys were still behind as the whole thing happened, so they had about like a day or two of the whole attacks, and what that was like. And yeah, it's pretty fucking surreal, man. It's insane, the times that we live in. Like sometimes to me the thing that kind of scares me is just as much as I do like certain aspects of technology, it scares me that these fucking, like, these beings evolved from gorillas, who still feel greed and anger and jealousy and are still territorial, have access to all these nukes and everything, and then that's kind of like, oof, it kind of makes you worry a little bit.
Yeah, volatile times, man. It's I've preached it for fucking 20 fucking years now, but we really are seeing the literal manifestation of the Kali Yuga, and so I do firmly believe that, and I don't think it's not going to end well. That's for certain.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that. I actually wanted to specifically ask you about that, because last time you were on, you said that, it seems that we're entering the age of Kali Yuga, and I wanted to ask you the question which you've already kind of answered, is how much do you think that we're actually closer to that now than when you said it last time?
I'd say we're pretty damn close to I guess what you'd call the twilight of it, so it's kind of it's a difficult concept, because if you want to look into the interpretations, Kali Yuga has been going on for like an absurdly long amount of time, so that's a bit subjective, but I mean the idea of it at its core, I think that we're the idea of the cycle, that cosmoses and ages are organic, so they have a birth and eventually a maturity, and then a decline and a death, and you see certain things in these final stages that we're certainly seeing now, and then again it's open for interpretation how these things actually manifest in the gross and physical world, if it is something like a literal apocalypse, or if it's something maybe more subtle than that. I'm starting to think it's not going to be very subtle. It's not very subtle right now, so yeah, that's other people have other views, but that's my personal take on it, is I think that, and I couldn't say if when that would be, or what it would exactly look like in all of its details, but maybe it's 5 years from now, or maybe it's 10, or maybe it's 50. I fucking highly doubt we'll make it 50 years. I think we'll lucky if we make it 10 before there's at least a collapse in civilization.
One thing that you said to me in private, which really stood out to me, and I wanted to ask you about that on here, was the fact that you said that you had a dream, or rather a nightmare, whilst you were actually in Israel. Could you disclose some of that for us?
Yeah, actually, I had multiple nightmares. It was pretty interesting, because they were, more of the uncanny sort. Waking up, shaken up about it. They're pretty abstract dreams, so it's kind of hard to relay these ones. One was, it has the bizarre nature of as dreams do, where it went from some kind of mundane dream and kind of shifted at some point to something else, but had to do with like a coworker, which was pretty, mundane at first, but then this coworker at one point had kind of looked directly at me, and the dream started to become almost a bit more lucid, and started, I guess, speaking in tongues, and then it just was really like kind of culminated in this weird thing, because then his speech kind of slowly degenerated into like almost something mechanical, and then as I woke up, I realized I was hearing this very loud old clunky AC, so that was kind of like feeding into the dream at the same time, but just this unnameable aura about it that it's hard to express through the context of the dream itself was there, like this presence that, when I woke up kind of with a start, I had trouble shaking it off. I actually had to go take a shower, and then the following night had one in some kind of like rundown abode, and I don't remember all the details. I really should have went back and looked at this, but there was some kind of entity, some kind of invisible presence in this house, which was supposed to be my house, and it was reconfiguring. This is a weird one, but it was reconfiguring like water pipes within the house, specifically in the bathroom and then out in the kitchen. And like if I walked from one area to the next, every time I entered the new area, it was reconfigured in more elaborate patterns and designs. And for some reason, it had some kind of, in the dream again. Dream logic doesn't quite jive with everyday logic, but it had this significance of some kind of cipher, and that there was this malevolent presence letting itself be known. But again, it was really strange. And then it culminated at the end. There were these stair steps, and I was kind of climbing up them on all fours. And at the top, it had something to do with the number 12. There's 12 steps, and then it said like the 12th step or something along those lines. And that's when I woke up. So yeah, I mean, super abstract, right? Really, what do you draw from that? But more so was the feeling of that uncanny presence of otherness, that dreadful emanation that kind of presided over the dream, I guess you could say. So yeah, so it was interesting because again, I woke up with kind of a start, and really out of sorts, and so it's just having these dark dreams in Israel for some reason.
The thing about that I'm getting as well is also that obviously there's so many things to unpack right there, but one thing to, I guess, is a good thing to clarify for us is that in a lot of dreams, the actual details of what you see is sometimes it's relevant, but sometimes it's not the point. Sure. It's more the feeling that it leaves behind. Like sometimes, like you said, you'll have a dream that if you were to look at the information presented there, it doesn't make sense. It might not even seem like a scary thing, but it leaves behind this lingering feeling that is absolutely horrid. Like I remember one weird nightmare that I had as a child was just having a TV, and then when I unplugged the TV, it wouldn't go off, and that was something that like really freaked me out, and that's like, sure. It doesn't sound that scary, but then the feeling that it conveys is a different thing. It's like you feel it in your chest. It's not in your head. You know what I mean? It's a different thing. It's not just the information.
Yeah, exactly. And then we could look at certain elements, like, of course, I don't want to run too far into like the, I don't know, psychological dream interpretation, because some of that is interesting to me. Most of it is not that interesting to me. But you could look at it, and without me glancing at that specifically, I was thinking like there seemed to be a emphasis on water. So I don't know how to describe them. They're like water pipes, I guess you could say. And one would be probably serve as like a shower or a bathtub. And then out in the other end, I kept going back and forth, and it was almost like this thing was fucking with me, because I was like, it changed the configuration of these pipes, which almost made like some kind of crazy chaotic mandala, obviously very squared, but almost sigil-like. And then I would go out to the sink area, and it would be, same kind of situation going on. So yeah, who knows? But obviously there's like a water connotation there, and that pops up in a lot of these kind of dreams. And of course, the symbolism of water we can go directly to stuff like Mercury or feminine and chaotic forces, and stuff that's like chthonic and so on and so forth. So that was just one afterthought. There's other things to look at. Like I'm not quite sure what to make of the 12 steps, or if it means anything. The redness of the room. Those are things you can analyze, and maybe there's something symbolic to it. But also, I also believe that your dream mind is also pulling in these symbols, and some of them might be more residual or uncanny.
I mean, you said there's the symbolism of the water, but then there's also the symbolism of a house itself, because that is something that very much can have its own spiritual presence, just the structure of a house alone, this is something that we do talk about, and the idea of like, what exactly is that house presenting, and to have something fundamental spell about it, which is the piping, be changed or fucked with by some other entity. Now, you could say I'm looking into it too much, but immediately I'm recognizing some signs there, at least from my own viewpoint, where I'm like, there's a lot that could be taken away from that.
Yeah, sure. And as you know, the symbol of the house is a very important one to me, and that's actually going to be the central theme on the next Akhlys album. So that's a huge one for me, as this abode of dreaming, and connected to the underworld, and kind of a hierarchical structuring. The way that I'm looking at it is 3 levels. And so you've got the hearth as the middle level, and so that would be like the level that one would preside, where rites are done, especially ancestral rites. The hearth and ancestral rites are pretty heavily tied together. The ancestral dead as well, and then you have above and below that. And so below that, I'm placing the cellar. And so the cellar is going to be like a symbol of the underworld, right? And then above that is the attic, and so the attic would be like the Empyrean, or the celestial, with emphasis on the kind of metaphysical Arctic or polar north. And then there's other stuff around that, like symbols like the celestial dragon and so on and so forth, but all within the context of this house of dreams, and which is interesting because dreams are often equated with the underworld to begin with, especially if you start looking at certain classical stuff, like from the Greeks, or even into some of the depth psychologists that I do appreciate, like James Hillman puts a lot of emphasis on this and wrote quite a bit on it. So, but that's and so, like you said, the house itself, especially in dreams, can be its own genus loci, its own presiding spirit, and presides over that house, and not just that, but kind of is the house. And I think that you can say the same about certain locations in the waking world too. Like, I think that maybe this is has to do with hauntings in certain scenarios. That they're it does collect enough, whatever you want to say, energy or whatnot over time, and that eventually there is a genus loci of any kind of given abode or area.
This is really fascinating to me. By the way, that's great to know the context of the of the upcoming album. I'm super fascinated as to how you're going to explore that through music, and I'd like to take a deeper dive into that with yourself. But you mentioned something really interesting there, and it's about the energy that gets attached to items and objects, which is something that I've been quite fascinated with recently, actually. And I guess we have to make the example as well of your partner Kimberly, who does Horn Gods as well. Shout out to her for her work. It's really cool if people want to check that out. But one thing that's really interesting to me is what is the spiritual connotations to objects in particular, because I think that there's something that latches onto these things now, whether that's a product of our brain waves or some kind of radiation. I don't know. It must be a difficult thing to measure at the very least. But from your perspective personally, what do you think is the relationship between, I guess, energies and actual physical objects?
That one's a hard one to nail down, truthfully, because you can quickly get into we can get into like a sort of animism here, where everything, all physical objects have their own kind of spirit to it, and I think you can run wild with that. And it's hard for me to say exactly 100%. So I do think that almost like a psychic personal attachment occurs over time, right? And what that is exactly is hard to say. But then when you have objects that don't have a personal connection to you directly, but can still perhaps be charged with whatever uncanny energy or presence, then that really makes you stop and think and what this is about. There's I'm trying to think of the Peter Hamilton Giles wrote a book called Ritual Space and the Crooked Path Beyond, where he goes into this, and I don't want to try and get into too much detail on it here because it does get quite steep. Sure. But this whole concept of stuff like the ritual item in the ritual room, the importance of absence and presence, and the imaginal, and even with a ritual object, like almost a historical mythos to that object, on where you are associating it with certain things or maybe certain histories, and maybe those certain histories aren't exactly true, but they form a mythology in your mind, which then strengthens this connection. Yeah, I mean, it's something that I go on and on about and still kind of ponder, but like, especially if you start talking about, like, I don't know, if you like a haunted item or something like that, like what would that be exactly? Especially if it wasn't something that you had developed some kind of psychological or psychic connection with, then those ones are kind of harder to explain, more uncanny. And I do think that is a thing. How that works exactly, I don't know if I could articulate that.
I think it's a very interesting topic, and I actually have a personal sort of attachment to this particular idea at the very least. I'm sure I mentioned to you before that for a very short period of time, I lived in a very haunted flat in Birmingham, UK, and in that time that I was there, the thing that I mean, obviously, if people want to hear the full account of exactly all the details that happened there, they can check out the very first episode of the podcast. But basically, what happened when I was there was that we moved into this flat. It was myself and my ex-partner. And then it was like one of those, this was near the Erdington area of Birmingham. And it's basically like a giant Victorian house that's been turned into like multiple flats, so it's like maybe like 5 or 6 different flats, so ground floor, middle floor, and then there was the attic, and our flat was like the single flat up in the attic, right? Yeah. And during the time when we were moving in there, and until this point, I never had an experience like that, and that was something that really opened my mind a lot, that week that we spent there for the, we only managed 1 week there before we had to run out in the middle of the night. And take a coach out of Birmingham, but that's another story. But basically, when we first moved there, I remember looking all around the flat, just like finding places to put my shit, and there was a spot where I thought, oh, cool, I can turn this into my studio, And then there was like a little cupboard there in the bedroom. And inside that cupboard, and I had not seen this previously, there was basically a pair of iron weights, like dumbbells. And then there was a photo of New York from pre-9/11. So you still got the World Trade Center standing in the photo. So obviously it will have gone back by at least minimum 15 years at the point when we were moving in. That was back in 2016 when we did that. So for some reason, when I saw that, something about it, now at this point I wouldn't say I was that spiritually inclined or aware even, or even like sensitive, like I was quite like, sort of like very just stubborn and not very sensitive to energies and emotions and some of these things as much as I would be now. And when I saw those items, without any explanation, there was a feeling of dread that entered my stomach, and I was like, "Ooh, why do I feel like this?" And something about it made me feel very uncomfortable without being able to describe. Like the immediate eye contact that I had with it, I was like, "Oof, I'm not sure about this." So what I decided was to take them and move them to the other side of the flat, and then I put them sort of like inside the roof, so it was kind of like hard to access. But then something about that made me feel even worse about it at the time, and I found it kind of confusing. I'm like, what's going on? Maybe I'm just stressed out because we're moving and this is our first place together and blah blah blah. And then, lo and behold, that entire week, the kind of shit that was happening was just unreal. I was having, we were having doors opening and closing themselves. We had the wardrobe. It was like a magnet wardrobe that was like closing itself and opening with no like draft coming through. Clothes being put away and then suddenly turning up wet in a different part of the house. Boxes being moved around. Voices, that was something that started to appear like on the last couple of days. It was almost like radio voices that would just appear in random parts of the flat. It was actually a pretty fucking traumatizing experience, if I'm honest. Both on myself and my partner at the time, and obviously me being the man of the place, I had to kind of, keep my shit together, but it was fucking terrifying, because but it was like almost like it brought this pugilistic side out of me towards the end of it, where I was like, yeah, fuck you, whatever's here. Before we left her, I just screamed fuck off into the flat, and as we left, something pushed her behind me and down the stairs almost, where she almost fell. It was really fucking strange, and I feel weird talking about it because it's something I've questioned to myself a lot. But my personal conclusion first and foremost was that, oh, okay, so whatever those items were, they belong to someone here who obviously didn't want their stuff getting touched. Which is funny because I've recognized that I don't like my stuff being touched, especially like guitars or things like that. If someone touches my shit without permission, that's something that really it rubs me the wrong way. And what was interesting is, basically, like, not to go on too much of a tangent here, but when we were downstairs and talking to an older gentleman who was there smoking weed with his son-in-law, of all people, we spoke to the guy, and he said that apparently there was someone upstairs some years ago who was playing around with a Ouija board, and then that person's body got found by the Birmingham canals. Now, how true this is, I don't know. I've looked all over the internet and not found any kind of crime reports, but I do know that not long after we moved out of there, someone else tried to move in, but then within, I think, 4 months, when I revisited the flat out of curiosity, the whole place was boarded up. So I have no idea what happened after we moved out of there and if new tenants moved in and whatnot. But it was a very interesting thing. But back to our point, I think that's where it gets interesting when you're talking about the connotation of physical objects and the spiritual dimension, if you will.
Yeah, sure. And maybe these things, once they're disturbed, then there's a negative reaction. And who's to say? I mean, even in the haunted house scenario, exactly what you're dealing with, if it's truly a departed dead that is self-aware and interacting, it doesn't seem to be that. But to me, that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems, if anything, a shell of perhaps something like that, something that's not maybe fully aware in that sense. I know Renee went on, that was kind of his view on it, that these aren't actually your departed dead, that doesn't exist, but that they are like a shell or a resonance of the previous living. And that's why sometimes a lot of, like, when you hear these encounters with anything ghostly, spectral, that might be interpreted as the dead, they seem to do the same tasks over and over. They seem not to notice you a lot of the time. And then you have other activity like you described, which is more like poltergeist activity.
Right.
And so those two might be totally separate categories. So at that point, you might be dealing with, something else entirely, an intelligence that isn't or wasn't ever human. And that might be fully aware. So it's hard to say. I mean, we'll never exactly know. So
that wouldn't surprise me, because I recall that on the very last night that we were there, wherever I went inside the flat, this is just as we were packing things, but wherever I went in the flat, a very weird smell would follow me. And and then it wasn't me. Like, I know that for a fact. I was well showered by that point, more or less. But whenever I went, like, there was this weird, really like almost rotting stench that would just appear out of nowhere. That was like really freaky. But at that point, I was like so angry, like I didn't even care. I wasn't even like scared anymore. I was just like fuck you, you know. That's kind of like the kind of mindset I was in. But I recall as I was walking through the kitchen area at the time, it was a very weird layout in this place, but I remember coming through to past the kitchen to turn left to go to the end of the studio to grab like my guitar or something that was like urgent. And I remember seeing on the right side of my vision like a black shadowy figure stood there, and not
Sure.
and it had a kind of like a threatening presence about it. Again, it's a difficult thing to decipher. Sometimes when I try and think of these things, you know, like paranormal events or, like you said, poltergeist or anything like that, what comes to my mind is I wonder if these things happen in the absence of human beings or living beings, meaning that, let's say, like you say, that the shell exists there, or there's some kind of like a residue left there from a previous lifetime or some kind of memory. But I feel like it's almost like you need the human brainwaves to activate such a thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it might require, subject and object at that point. It might require observer and the observed. And who knows? I mean, of course, there's plenty of supposed footage. I think most of the time that whenever I see this shit, it's not very compelling. It's usually, I think it's bullshit, but there's plenty of footage out there of, for some reason, a teacup fucking flies off a fucking table for no reason where, well, no one's there. And even if that's the case, I'm like, what's the point of that? Like, what the fuck does that mean? Now, if you're standing in the room and you get hit upside the head by the fucking teacup, that's something else. Cause then you're like, something is aggressive and doesn't want me here.
Right.
I don't know if these, and that's kind of one view of these things is that and I mean, that's almost like a Jungian view, like, without us, there would be none of these things would exist, like without this human psyche, then these things have no ground. And I don't know if I agree with that either, actually. Probably not at all. But yeah. And maybe as you were saying, maybe that's what it needs as its catalyst or its trigger. And maybe that's what kind of awakens it to these kind of reactions. So
have you had any kind of experiences like that? Obviously, we've talked about like the dream realm and, sleep paralysis and things like that, which is still very fascinating to me. I could talk about it all day. But have you had anything like that whilst being awake where you see or hear or experience things that just kind of don't seem normal, at least?
No, usually mine have to do with some kind of parasomnia or falling into sleep or during sleep or coming out of sleep. I've had a few very subtle things, nothing hyper uncanny, but one that I've related before that was actually after an initiation I did. So I kind of gave it, actually it was the same night. So that kind of makes it more interesting, but it was still like I was sleeping when it occurred. Basically it was a knocking at the door, which wouldn't seem very shocking or to make much of it. But another individual was there with me at the time who also experienced it. So that made it really bizarre. And the door to the house I lived in at the time was actually open because it was summertime and hot, and the screen door was shut. So you'd have to, I mean, hypothetically, you could say, well, someone could have snuck up, quietly opened the screen door while we were sleeping on a couch right next to the door. We're right next to it. Snuck in, knocked 3 times loudly, and then somehow ninja'd out of there because it woke me straight up. But I looked right outside, and there was nothing out there. So, I mean, that's the one that comes to mind. That's a little bit more bizarre because it was experienced by someone else, not just myself. Outside of that, no, I nothing that I can describe as. I've never seen a ghost manifest in that way. I've never seen any sort of poltergeist activity. I did see an orb once in my house, which was pretty bizarre, and I don't know what to make of that. It was like kind of a orangish red fiery orb that I caught in my periphery and looked over and saw it for a second, and then it just kind of fizzled out. But again, what the fuck does that mean? Other than it was very uncanny. Because I was like, what the fuck was that? Obviously. Other than that, no. I mean, with being what I'm into, I would certainly love to have those experiences. So.
Sure, yeah. Have you ever heard of a thing called stone tape theory?
No, I'm not familiar with that. What is that?
Oh, it's quite interesting. My friend Simon Lucas, drummer from Winterfell, he used to be the camera person for UK's Most Haunted, and he was telling me about that when he was on the podcast a little while ago. Yeah, basically, it's the idea that certain objects, as we said earlier, particularly, I think, stones, or I don't know if it's like material specific, but he was saying that they have a memory of their own, so certain minerals in particular, apparently they record events and things like that. And this is why sometimes when people do see manifestations of ghosts, like let's say one thing that's actually quite commonly reported, especially in the UK, particularly on some of the northern regions where people, where the Romans would go to, sometimes people would actually see the manifestation of an actual Roman soldier. Sure. Like in the proper outfit and everything, and the idea is that rocks and objects and buildings and such can actually record those events and those pieces of history, which I think is particularly very fascinating to me. Going back to the subject of what you were talking about with the structure of a house, especially with cellars, because I think that a lot of different weird things might happen in like a cellar, and I don't know if you've ever worked at a pub before, but the cellars are a weird fucking place to go to. It always feels like there's something else down there.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of that with the cellar, and same with the attic, right? Like attics tend to be very weird places, and usually people don't want to just go hang out in an attic or a cellar because it gives off a certain vibe usually, and that's I think that goes into archetypes and symbols, and not just purely in a psychological context, but even a spiritual one. These are outlands. These are liminal spaces. People don't typically reside in a cellar, and so they become the liminal spaces, like the desert or the dark forest or the abandoned ruins. They become those areas, but within our own abode. And so I think that's why even when you say the word cellar, it kind of invokes in people kind of a dreadfulness, immediately. And so, yeah, I think that those are interesting places. I think those are also the best places to set up ritual spaces because of that, because it already is charged with the liminality. Now, of course, over time, any ritual space, when done right, you're kind of cultivating that anyway. You're kind of harvesting that liminality over time. But if you do it in a space that it already has that pre-existing liminal cusp into otherness, then you're might be doing yourself even more favors. That it's already a place of power. So
it's a place of power, but also what are you trying to let in? Because you never know what's actually on the other side of that. I think this is something that I think just as a general observation, since we're talking about rituals, I think one thing that you will find is, and perhaps this might have applied to both of us at a younger age, but one thing that you will find is a lot of people who might be from a more atheistic viewpoint, but are wanting to rebel against the current of, let's say, the monotheistic faiths and whatnot, will somehow still go through with certain ritualistic practices. Of invoking demons, let's say, or certain entities that there's a lot to obviously unpack there, but it's interesting to me and that they would do such a thing yet not believe in the monotheistic religions, because what that also does is they don't realize how dangerous it could be to perform certain rituals, especially if you don't know what you're doing, especially if you don't have the right spiritual fortitude to actually pull something like that off. I find it almost concerning, and think like it's somewhat foolish of how lightheartedly some individuals, maybe even myself in the past included, will approach something like a ritual so lighthearted. Oh, like, let's just call down Samael, it's like you don't realize what you're getting yourself into. with that sort of
Sure.
thing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of levels to that. I mean, at first glance, I think that there's a lot of psychodrama involved. So if when people contact me and say that they invoked or evoked Samiel or something like that, I take it with a grain of salt immediately.
Sure.
But I think probably not. Probably it's either you're just bullshitting because that's what you do, or you had a whole lot of psychodrama. Now let's remove that 99%, and you were talking about like someone legitimate who's legitimately into this and well practiced. Even then, I would say that there's still a danger in it. In any kind of ceremonial invocation of any kind of intelligence. How do you know that's what you're having dialogue with? I mean, that's just because that you said that that's who you were trying to contact, or even if you had a dialogue with such an intelligence, because why they tell you that that's who they are. So you're not even going to know what you're dealing with, per se. And so I think there's a huge volatility in that. And then, I mean, furthermore, with like that, the invocation, evocation, ceremonial magic, goetic stuff, all that I find very interesting for sure. And I think that there is a level of legitimacy to it. For myself, I kind of ask why, like, why are you doing this exactly? So if you look to like Renaissance or before the text on these, it's for usually it's for petty means. It's for to have someone fall in love with you, or to have riches, or find treasure. It seems to be a kind of a humorous one that pops up a lot in those texts. And what a volatile thing, it's like, or you could just do that through common means, or whatever. But yeah, so it's interesting. I think I'm more personally interested in an invocation of, I guess, what you could call your own daemon. And so this can be interpreted if we want to look at it from like kind of a Golden Dawn Crowley-esque. That would be the holy guardian angel. Although I don't get into all the specifics around that. Something probably more akin to the Greek conception of this. And so that's more, what I'm interested in personally is kind of speaking to that shadow self, or however you want to phrase that higher daemon of self. That's definitely more my thing than trying to, invoke some outer intelligences.
What would you be hoping to achieve from such communication, if I'm not prodding too much into a personal realm?
Well, it certainly wouldn't be anything mundane. I mean, and then of course this gets into very ineffable area, so it would be hard to articulate, but it would certainly be a union, a transcendental experience. And so there would be utmost value in that, and so there would absolutely have to be transference of gnosis in such an experience. But how do you articulate that exactly? So
are you familiar with the book called Shams al-Ma'arif?
I am not.
I know that you professed to me before that you do have at least somewhat of a fascination with Sufi Islam. So this was one that I really wanted to bring up to you. Is Shams al-Ma'arif is that's the Arabic name for it. It's basically like an occult book, which is essentially it's made up of all of these various different formulas and things that you could put into practice. So it's like literal like step-by-step guide of things that you can do in the context of magic and esotericism. Now, I will say as well, for anyone who's listening to this who might be sensitive to such a thing, I am, please, I might be mentioning some things from the book, because the thing is, it's a very controversial book, in the sense that if you go and look at the online reviews of it anywhere, you have tons of like actual Muslims saying this book is haram, don't use this is dangerous, like the devil will come and get you, which I think is interesting, and there's certainly, I'm not saying that there aren't consequences for those ritualistic things, as we already kind of touched upon, but I found this one to be particularly interesting. So it goes back to Sufi Islam, and one of amongst the things that it discloses is, for example, again, in the context of objects, how you can harness the power of Jupiter, and how many times you have to draw a certain symbol on which color cloth and things like that, which I think is interesting. And knowing the kind of inspirations that you go to, I couldn't recommend you to check out this book anymore.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. That definitely sounds like something I'd be fascinated with for sure. And I mean, I'm fascinated with any of these things, whether or not I practice them personally, but I'm always fascinated with any, especially the kind of volatile and adverse side of these things. Just because I am, I've always had a magnetism to those kind of things. But yeah, that one sounds interesting for sure. So.
Apparently the person who wrote it, his name escapes me right now, but there was something like, this wasn't a book that was meant to be discovered by people. So there was like a writing at the very beginning or something that said that whoever finds this book and opens it or shares it, curse be upon you for doing so.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very. It sounds almost like very Lovecraftian or something, So
sure, yeah,
yeah, and we see this a lot. That's interesting since it's a historically legit book. Assuming it is. But we see this a lot, especially in like a modern occult text, especially ones where they will try and claim some kind of elder lineage to it, and then they usually use those things as a selling point. It's like, it's like, don't dare turn these pages, and that kind of shit. Yeah, that bothers me a little bit in the modern occult publications, because it's kind of, I don't know, juvenile. It's like that would have been more exciting to me when I was 14 years old or something. But yeah, so sometimes you can start to see through the bullshit.
Yeah, it's like having a black metal band, and then breaking up as soon as you realize more than 25 people listen to you.
I don't know. That is kind of badass, truthfully.
Yeah. That's it. And I'm definitely not making the case example of Judas Iscariot here, but here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, it's very interesting, man. I think, definitely go check out that book, And obviously, I'm not advocating this. I'm not the person sharing it. Well, I kind of said the name, but it's up to people's own discretion if they actually want to look into this one. One thing that I really wanted to talk to you about as well was this was obviously Iblis Manifestations. We're all about the esoteric here. I've been waiting a very long time to have you on here, man. So. Let's, if you like, I really like to unpack a little bit on the subject of dream incubation. Obviously,
sure. Yeah.
With a lot of Akhlys' work in particular being related to such a thing. Dream incubation, for anyone who's obviously unaware, it's basically the idea that back in the old days, a lot of times people would go and sleep near like a temple or something, not inside the temple, but outside, apparently, where they would actually try and use that dream time to communicate with a specific god. Asclepius allegedly was one who was commonly approached for such a thing, and people would actually come away getting very interesting lessons out of it. Some people would even get told to go and get inside a cold lake because that would heal them, which obviously nowadays we know the benefits of cold exposure and things like that, which I think is absolutely fascinating. But what's your experience of this topic? How did you discover this? How did you become fascinated with it? And just what's your experience with it, really?
Well, I think I first discovered it in the truly historic context through Greek and Roman necromancy, the book by Daniel Ogden, who is a great historian who focuses on these things, and that introduced me to the concept in this historical concept of sleeping not only, so those were like the dream incubation that you're speaking of would be like the heroic dream incubation, where they go to either heroic or sites of gods that are important to them. Another really popular one, which Peter Kingsley discusses specifically in Dark Places of Wisdom, was like you were talking about the Asclepius, but a lot of times this was done at temples of Apollo, and apparently not only to commune with Asclepius, and of course you've got like this, of course that healing aspect there, but then underneath the temple in these caves, and I want to say they're called Charoniums, like Charon, the ferryman, and they would, most of the people that are going there have some kind of ailment, they're sick or crippled or something like that, but they would do the dream incubation in there, and that actually was to travel into the underworld, and then they also saw that as a way of also being healed. So there's a kind of a Thanatos connotation there as well. So those are interesting. And then you have the ones that occurred on grave sites. And so a lot of times they would do this, like what it can be called a tomb incubation, or, something like grave incubation, where they would sleep over the burial place of usually a loved one, and in hopes of being able to commune with them. So, and then you just kind of have a general concept of incubation, which I would say, isn't tied to one of these specific locales, but now it's almost kind of a meditative process, but you're just kind of laying down and purposely entering into that hypnagogic state, and kind of resting there, kind of trying to perpetuate it before you just kind of fall asleep or wake back up. And I think that can go into like a contemplative approach to esotericism, the mystical contemplation. And the counter of that would be the active side, which would be more like elaborate ceremonial. Anything that's ceremonial magic is going to be its opposite than the just purely contemplative mysticism. So, but I think that incubation is something that I use, and I think it's something I just recently did a quite lengthy one that I use in addition to other things. And so I think it's important. This was a long time ago, but I did used to live in a cabin that was right up the way from a cemetery, and of course this is way up in the mountains, and quite an old cemetery, because it was mostly like the people buried in there mostly were like part of the silver and gold rush era, because we have so much of that was so big in the mountains here. But anyhow, I did go down there and visit it a couple times, but I did do kind of a pseudo incubation over a burial site. I didn't quite get fully into like a dream state, so it was more kind of like, if anything, just the hypnopompic, maybe just for a very, very short window. But that was still interesting. So
it's fascinating. Like this whole idea that obviously when you're in that state, it's sort of like your brain is not working at its 100%. So it's the same as psychedelics, it's like psychedelics don't really change your perception, but what they do is they bring down and they lower the certain guards within your mind, which then allow you to perceive the world in a different way. Just to sort of meet you in the middle there, I actually recently had a DMT experience at a cemetery, which was interesting, very thanks to, it was good, as you know, I don't even drink. I don't drink alcohol. I don't smoke cigarettes. I don't smoke weed, nothing. But the odd DMT trip, fuck yeah, absolutely. I think it's a necessity for life. Yeah. This was very profound and fascinating on many different levels. And just the feeling that I got away from it was just wild, But yeah, there's something about that, And the thing is that they might not always communicate back with you, and sometimes it might take time. Sometimes you might ask for something and then it'll take time for it to come through, maybe like 2-3 days. But when it does, it's something that like almost always work. I think to me, like a very minor version of it is like, you know, when they say talking to your pillow before you go to sleep. I want to wake up at 7, and then you go to sleep, and then you wake up like, you know, 6:59. You know what I mean? You know, just before the alarm goes off. And I think that it's a very fascinating thing. Now, whether there's some kind of a subconscious thing that we're tapping into, but either way, it's a crazy tool for me. I mean, I presume it's something that you believe in strongly if it's something that you've practiced regularly.
Yeah, and you know, semi-regularly. But
Sure.
you know, just to speak for a minute about because we touched on the subconscious and the psychological, and I absolutely don't throw any of that out. I think that's all valid. I think that's just a part of it all. You know, it's another fragment, and I think that we can enter into certain modes that might start to feel uncanny, and we are still perhaps maybe within the grounds of the psychological. And now I feel like it can keep pushing into where that ground of the psychological can end up being a bridge, and a bridge into something that now isn't just contained by the psychological. And so I think it's all valid to me. You know, like I don't throw out one in favor of the other exactly. So, and sometimes I don't spend too much time stressing over, was this, you know, a occult experience, a divine experience, or was it purely psychological? I think a lot of times these things can be true at once, especially when you're getting into ecstatic states. I think that the psychological is absolutely requisite for ecstatic states. You're not just enter into that just with the snap of a finger, typically. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on that real quick. But yeah, you know, and sometimes I almost find, you know, I'll do purposeful incubation, and you know, again, it's kind of like a meditative state. Do it prone, and kind of clear the mind. And then I would say that, like, you know, as far as the brain not working 100%, I would say more how I'd phrase that is you quit articulating in your mind day logic and day speech, and you'll start noticing, like, you know, what's we usually dubbed as like dream logic, like that starts to creep in. You're still having thoughts and they're still going a certain direction, but especially when you're in that in between state, that hypnagogic state before sleep, you'll start realizing, like, when you think back to a certain thought and then you try and put it into a rational semblance, that you're like, well, that's weird, makes sense rationally, impressionistically, or imaginally, it can make total sense. And that's when you realize that you're going between that day side logic and you're starting to dissolve into that night logic, or into that dream logic, which is just as logical, but it's, you know, it's hard to frame it discursively and in a day side rational way. So, but I find that's interesting, because that's usually when you're like, "Ooh, I was about to dream." You know, you're like, I was going from regular logical thoughts to something that's not that, and then kind of come back. So, but yeah, I wouldn't say like I wouldn't put the dream logic below day side, or what we typically understand as logic, by any means. I don't think that it's like subservient to it or inferior to it in any way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, the feeling part that we talked about earlier, that feels more real than a lot of day-to-day experiences. You know, like, let's say in real life, if someone like pulls a weapon on you, I've been in that situation when I was younger. You kind of get scared, but then I've had dreams that scared me a lot more than that did. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Oh yeah, sure. And I think that typically with you know, to highlight what we're probably talking about here with feeling is specifically presence. And you know, that it's kind of like if you're standing in a room and you thought you were by yourself all of a sudden, and you realize someone's there. There's like a certain feeling that washes over you. You know,
the breathing down the neck.
Yeah, exactly. You could walk into something like a basement or a cellar, like we were talking about, and maybe you're just going down there to fetch a box, but all of a sudden you get the hackles and the hair, the hair raising up the back of the neck, and you feel a presence.
Yeah.
What interests me a lot with a lot of stuff that I put my focus on, and a lot of the subjects within Akhlys, is there's this paradoxical presence that it's a presence that comes from an absence. Or an absent, within its absence, there's this dreadful, uncanny presence. And that's why that barren cellar or any area like that, a black hallway, all of a sudden you get those hackles rising. And that is, the presence of otherness. And so, I mean, otherness, to be other, it's got to be completely alien to yourself, to your perspective. And so, you have this presence of absence almost, and what a paradoxical thing. But those are the things that cause that amount of sudden dread that then triggers abjection within the self. It's almost a casting out of yourself, because it's very disorienting. Of course, it's the greatest kind of terror is that kind of dread.
Very interesting. I guess it's almost like a black hole in the spiritual realm, like a vacuum of conscious.
Yeah, like that intelligence and that presence is an absence, inversely so.
I like it. That's it's a fascinating topic. I actually never thought of it that way. I always thought of it as like the presence of something else, but like I said, there's so many other things that you could be interacting with within the fourth dimension. I mean, just one thing to quickly touch upon here as well is the like you were saying about the logic and the reason of the dream world, but also the reality that we experience as well, and how, like you said, both have the same value. I mean, it's just a matter of different dimensions. It's the same thing that you get with psychedelics. Not just psychedelics, there's only like one small aspect of it, I think, although a crucial one, at the very least in our development, particularly as far as culture and spirituality is concerned. But just even something like with meditation, with breath work, with dream incubation, all these things, I think that there's something that happens, it's just like tuning the frequency of your mind to a different layer of reality. There's the idea that even when babies are born, for a long time, as children, let's say, the pineal gland works much better and much more concisely. But then as you get older, other than external factors that may interfere with this and calcify it, i.e. fluoride or other things, but there's all, and then there's the idea of the fact that you depend on the third dimensional world to at least survive physically. There is the idea that babies and children see a lot more of these, let's say, paranormal experiences, or they sense these presences a lot more clearly than, let's say, an adult who never meditates does.
Yeah, I mean, you see the same ascribed to animals as well. Of course, like the cat staring at the corner for no reason or whatever that is. And right. I think it's an interesting theory. I mean, I couldn't say for sure, but yeah, I think it's interesting for sure. I think that, as far as hallucinogens or whatever it might be, it does. You are just kind of shifting the perspective. None of it is, I would say, is truly unreal. What you're receiving, I would say, the interpretation is where the crux is, and you can interpret that into something that's not true. But the ground of reality, I mean, it's kind of almost like all things at all times, and so we need some kind of focal point, some kind of antenna and focus. Otherwise, we'd just be drowning in perceptual chaos at all times. And so I think that's our brains are very attuned to getting us along day by day by putting those shutters on, so we're not receiving all possibilities at all time, which is kind of a more a platonic sense at looking at the ground of reality. But obviously that would absolutely drive you mad. You'd mentally break if you were perceiving all possibilities at all times. And so I think we perceive in a very limited view. And then when you start to obviously take, hallucinogens or DMT or, whatever it is, you're gonna change that lens a bit. You're gonna bring it into a different focus, or into a, widen that lens, or change the perspective on it. And so, it's interesting to look at, and especially with some of the studies that have been done around it, especially where a lot of these people tend to see the same entities or beings or whatever, these people that aren't connected whatsoever, and to where it becomes kind of a mainstay. I mean, you even have that with salvia. I did salvia quite a bit there for a while. I was pretty fascinated with it. And salvia is a weird one, because first off, you got to do it correctly.
Looks like you almost like go into full-on paralysis when you do it, right?
Oh yeah, it fucking knocks you the fuck out. Like it's definitely not a party drug. You're not walking around. Now, it kind of got a bad name, it seemed, because people were like, even for a while here, like 10 years ago, it was legal. Like, you could go to a store and buy it. And I think it's because it went under the radar for a while. And they'd always call it fake weed. They're like, oh yeah, this is some bullshit, but it's
have very different to weed, for anyone who's not, I mean, I've only seen like reaction videos of salvia, but I can probably say that it's very different to weed.
Well, I think they were saying that because they would just, smoke it like weed with a lighter, but you have to have a really, really hot flame to release the property. And so you need to use like a blowtorch, right? But if you do it properly, it hits you like a fucking ton of bricks, and it hits you fast and hard. I mean, it hits you so hard that you get that moment in your head where you're like, wait, this is too much. But then it's so much that you can't even think that anymore. Now you're just fucking gone. And it's somewhere between hallucinating and dreaming, because if you do it all the way, you do it properly, you will literally be out like you're sleeping. Your eyes will be closed and you're into a full dream state. And it's pretty bizarre, man. It's pretty bizarre. And then I've done it other times where it didn't hit me with that full force. Either I didn't go for it as hardcore, we had like a lesser strain, and even that's still really bizarre. You disassociate from your surroundings completely. If you didn't lose them 100% and go into a full-on hallucinogenic dream state, then you're still disassociated. I mean, I had ones where I thought I was literally on the wall, sitting on the wall suddenly, and that was fine with me, because that wasn't, didn't even cross my mind that would be a bizarre thing. But it doesn't last long. It only lasts a matter of minutes, truthfully. But it feels like it lasted hours and hours and hours, So that was an interesting one. But with that, why I brought that up is a lot of people see it, apparently like this kind of feminine figure that's reported a lot. I never did, but it's just interesting to find with these certain things that these certain beings or entities will arise, and these people experience this without being exposed to that knowledge beforehand, or whatever. It's cross cultural. So those things are interesting to me.
I think it's fascinating. I mean, there's the question of the DMT elves, and and the idea that so many people see the same thing. I've definitely interacted with things there. I'm not so sure if it was the elves, but it's kind of like sometimes it's almost like there's a different dimension or reality, and then you somehow pop in there out of nowhere. And then I remember like when I popped in there, there was something else there very close to me that was almost like, what the fuck are you doing here? It was
and I know there's a lot, the elves are, a lot of speculation that these could be, the traditional fae, the fae folk, same thing, elves, fae. But who knows? I mean, even there's been some interesting interpretation on UFO phenomena, especially now that it's become so fucking big, but that it's not a nuts and bolts thing, that it could be another manifestation of like something like the fae, or something demonic, which I think is maybe more probable, a little more interesting than nuts and bolts flying across the universe to come play hide and seek with us for zero reason.
Well, the UFO thing is fascinating to me, and it's fascinating to me how all of a sudden it's that much of a public knowledge, and it's like an open thing that you discuss. You see it on like mainstream news channels actually talking about it, which obviously automatically makes me actually hesitant as to, hey, hang on a minute, what the fuck are they trying to do now? Are they trying to fake an alien invasion here? You know, and then you start thinking, do they have?
Yeah. What psyop is this?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like you tried the bioweapon one on us a few years ago, you know, and then we got the war, and then you're gonna bring in climate change in a bit, and then so we got the alien invasion as well. So which one of these are we going with?
Yeah, the interesting thing with the alien thing, though, so I have a couple buddies that we've discussed this exactly, and one of them is definitely like 100% like it's bullshit, it's a psyop, and it's going to be the next, you know, thing like you discussed. I don't know. I was like, because the thing is, when they came out with like, you know, it was the Air Force first that came out and was like, yeah, this is legit. We can't say what it is, but here's the footage. And then you had like that character Lou Elizondo come out, and then we found out that the Pentagon actually does have had a top secret unit that was studying this. And for all that occurred, no one gave a fuck. No one gave a fuck about it. For the most part, no one cared. No one was shocked. No one was talking about it at work. You'd think that people would be like, oh my God, this is fucking mind-blowing. So if they were testing the waters on that as another distraction, I think they probably won't go that way, because no one's going to give a shit. No one's going to give a shit. At this point, you can be like, a UFO landed, here's the footage, and people will be like, cool, I'm going to go back to, you know, doom scrolling on Instagram now and pay attention to these wars, you know.
Well, people will react to it however way the mainstream media portrays it. If the mainstream media chooses to portray that as a crisis, then that's exactly what the people will perceive it as.
Yeah, I suppose if they framed it up as like an invasion, then yeah, people might start having some issues and paying more attention at that point. So, but I don't think that. I think what they're really doing, if anything, is, I mean, I've seen the phenomenon myself. Like I saw it once out in actually Great Sand Dunes National Park here in Colorado, which I used to go to quite a bit. Yeah, back in the day, and I didn't know at the time that it's like a hot spot for it, and I had no idea at the time. But and it was like, you know, I didn't see a fucking flying saucer. Like I saw the fucking typical ball of light performing in uncanny ways. You know, that's what it was. I couldn't quite tell. It seemed like it wasn't like super high in the sky, but it was hard to get perspective on it. But it was doing the zipping around, stopping on a dime, taking right angles. Then it would disappear. It would like blink out, but then it would reappear in another part of the sky, happen again. So that was really bizarre, but I don't, you know, I haven't spent a whole lot of time like, you know, what is that, or putting theories behind it, or, you know, all I know is it was a ball of light that acted in ways that seemed to defy physics. So it's bizarre. You know, I was like, well, that's weird, you know, and left it at that.
I think it's absolutely fascinating. And by the way, for clarification, you are officially the second guest on the podcast who's actually seen a UFO. So congratulations. You know,
Nice.
It's very interesting to me. What I'll say is this is my take on it. I think that the evidence that these entities exist and that UFOs exist and whatnot, that's not even a question at this point. Obviously, that there are these materials that we have access to, you know, whether it's the whole thing with Area 51 or, you know, like Roswell or the incidents in Virginia, all these things that have happened, you know, and the material is obviously gathered over time, and that there's the idea of reverse engineering, and obviously this would be a top tier national security thing, you know, so there's probably a reason why parts of it is kept as secret. Now, there may be other parts of it which we can, you know, really get into. But as far as I'm concerned, the existence of it is not a question for me. But sure. I also acknowledge the fact that it's just like COVID, you know? It's like, yeah, there was a virus. But then what are we going to do as a response to it? You know what I mean? And sure. How much are we going to blow it out of proportion here to really fuck things up? And it's the same thing with the...
Yeah, then they weaponize these things, because then they're like, okay, we got this. So, and that might have been weaponized at its origin, but you know, just things like this in general, they either don't exist at all, right? or I think a lot of times they do exist and they exploit that fact and they weaponize it. And so, this could end up being another one of those. That would be an interesting turn of events to see that one unfold. But I don't know. I think
my
that,
thought is my thought is completely with the latter on this one. In that yes, it exists, but it's something that easily, like, do you think we don't have enough technology to even portray something like this? All it takes is for one, I don't know, holographic experience, and then all it takes is for the media to report it in a certain specific way, and information travels very fast, and then all of a sudden it's public knowledge that, oh yeah, this thing is happening, we're being attacked by it. I remember, like, I think it's important to remember that a similar team is behind all of these kinds of events around the world of what we experience with COVID. And I think that, I remember with that one, at first it started at only 2 people in the UK had it. One of them was, I think, some guy from Iran, funnily enough, and then the other one was someone somewhere else. It was me, yes.
Your bandmate.
Yeah. That's it, yeah. That's why we call Trivex, even though none of us ever had it. But yeah,
it's an ad campaign.
Yeah. So someone joked to me at first, say, back in like late 2021 when people were like having their fucking first booster, and he was saying like, oh, so did you guys call yourself Trivex 10 years ago, expecting that this would be about getting the 3rd vaccine? And I said, listen, man, you wait 6 months and this joke is gonna be too old,
Yeah.
So yeah. And it did get old. I think some people have had like 6 or 7 now. I don't know. It's quite funny.
It's fucking scary is what it is, especially like if you're only paying attention to the legacy media. Unfortunately, my parents, who I fucking love very much, that's their whole world. They wouldn't dare stray from that. Like, they have every fucking booster under the sun, and they can't wait to get the next one, and they're old. So I'm just, I've got to worry about them now. But I'm like, man, they're not seeing anything else. They're not seeing all the shit that's coming out, And it's just like, they would just say it's all fake news. Everything's fake news. Everything besides CNN and the C is absolute lies. So
yeah, it's a very unfortunate thing, And to be honest with you, I'm kind of like, as I'm getting older and more mature, in a very strange turn of events in my own personal progression, I am lesser and lesser of the thought of live and let live, which is bizarre for me to even say that at this point. But again, at least to that principle, I would say, listen, if you want to do that, you go ahead and do that thing, But it's not a it's not a good look, because I recently, Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Yeah, not personally.
Well, yeah. Oh, you don't?
I'm aware. Yeah. I don't follow wrestling at all, but I do know who that is. Yeah.
Yeah, well, he made this like Instagram reel video, and he was talking about the books that he's been reading, and he sort of very, in a subtle way, actually dropped in that he's been reading RFK's book on the real Anthony Fauci, which I don't know if you've read that book or not, but
no, I haven't. No. Sounds like a downer, but yeah.
Oh man, that's the perfect way to put it down. But I actually made a comment on there. I don't often comment on social media and whatnot. It's not really my style, but I made a comment on there, and then I said, oh yeah, the real Anthony Fauci is horrifying, and everyone should be reading that, and people should be, held accountable. And
yeah, absolutely.
Steve Austin himself kind of replied to it with like a bullseye emoji kind of thing, and at first I was like, oh shit, well that's kind of cool, that doesn't happen often. And then beneath it came the barrage of comments of people calling me a right-wing extremist and everything,
Oh yeah,
it was just
of course, man. They go to that one every fucking time. So
every time I was like, well, this is a first, I never heard that one before, but I guess anything right or of what you guys are standing for must be like an extremist for sure, which is like fucking whatever, I don't care, and then I proceeded to cite some actual like legitimate stuff that I knew, because I never talked about this. I never talk about this a lot online or anywhere for various reasons, but I was actually with the vaccination line in beginning of 2021. And we had calls from people at the time, and this was the time when they were giving out AstraZeneca, and people were calling up saying that, oh yeah, my sister just died 2 weeks after getting this thing, you know, and the autopsy reports are showing blood clots. Should I still get mine? And when you would try to report these, basically what would happen was that they would come out and say that, oh yeah, sorry, you know, you got to go back to your GP. But then all GPs across the country were advised to refer them to the number that they were calling, which would come through to us. So it was like every kind of inquiry and concern was lost in this thing, and then we had to follow a script that said, oh yeah, it's safe and effective. You know, it's like, based on what? Exactly what? Who said it's safe and effective? Like, where's your fucking evidence here? You know, and then you get people who will then come out and call you a right-wing extremist for saying that, yeah, there's no evidence here. You know, I know so many people, including myself, who never had it and are absolutely fine. Obviously, the virus, you can catch it and it sucks, and then it might kick your ass for a little while. But then we should be holding the people that funded the labs accountable, not the people who aren't getting vaccinated. It's such a fucking stupid thing that we even have to have this discussion, but it's the mind virus. I think some people are sacrificed to it completely.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sad to see, but you know, at some point, you know, that's, I was thinking about, you know, what this really unfolds the way it seems like it's starting to unfold, and a lot of people start getting sick and dying, and that's just gonna be what it is, and you know, we'll be the ones that didn't fucking take it, I guess. And you know, but then you got to think what was the end game here, you know. I was joking about this before. I was like, it sounds like you're going to have a whole lot of right-wing extremists left, and not a lot of people on the left, because I'll be fucking dead. So I was like, who thought this would up? Yeah.
I mean, listen, I know plenty of right-wing people who also took it as well, you know, and I know left-wing people who didn't take it. But I'm like, listen, fucking do what works for you, you know, like just stop like fucking, you know, pushing it on other people. You know, what happened to my body, my choice, you know? So 1 minute that's like a thing, and then the next minute you're forcing it not just on other people, but like on other people's kids and stuff. I had some very weird conversations with some people about this, and I'm genuinely, you know, like I don't strive for confrontation. I like, you know, there's that pugilistic aspect to my personality sometimes, but I'm much more interested in finding a resolve in things. And it seems like with some people, they're so taken by this whole narrative that it's like, you know, that whole idea of exchanging one's own freedom for safety. There's nothing you can do for them past that point, you know, like there's like, even a conversation is almost pointless.
Yeah, and that is the worst exchange, you know. You're just a slave at that point, you know. So I'd much rather have my freedom. I take my freedom over, you know, government's safety any day.
Yeah, absolutely, man. You know, I've since the last time you and I talked, obviously for the whole thing that you guys were facing because of the Nightbringer thing that sort of came back with the Julius Evola quote that, you know, like you ended up like getting some stuff with. I've become very curious in this Evola character, and I've actually been reading up about some of his philosophies on certain things, and I gotta say, you know, he's very, very interesting. You know, like if you want to, I think for anyone who's at least interested in reading about the guy, if you separate at the very least the politics of it, you know, if that's something that, you know, well, obviously that side of things definitely can be controversial, but if you want to look at the spiritual side of what he was preaching, I think it's absolutely fascinating. There's so many things that you could learn from, and it was this idea that to him, man would really find ascendance either in like a divine ascendance, in a sense of either ego death or death. And the way he approached war. And I know you earlier, actually, as we were talking about the whole Israel situation and the conflict in the Middle East, you also kind of pointed to the idea of whether this war is a manifestation of something else that's being justified in the physical realm. And I know that's very much kind of like a school of thought that he was a part of.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He put a lot of emphasis in regards to to all that, especially on warfare. So he saw it as one of the different modes of transcendence, and that was for the warrior caste. Was, you could look at it in a Nordic context. It was, so that's very Nordic, right? The Valkyrie and dying on the battlefield, and that is your transcendence, right? Like that is the only way to that in that within that religious current right there. They had to die on the battlefield in battle, and then he also puts emphasis on especially the conflicts between the Christians and the Muslims, and saw that, or even jihad. He talks about jihad quite a bit, and its concept at its core. And I'm not tying this to any of the modern shit that's going to trigger people now, but at its core, just death in battle, and death as a warrior, death on the battlefield. And this is again a concept that's also made any nation what it is they have to have the concept of the warrior. Once you lose that, then you're in trouble. But yeah, that was one mode that he put a lot of emphasis on. Was that warrior caste and transcendence through warfare and death in battle.
Yeah, I mean, he also did, I believe, at least from what I've read, that he did point that it doesn't necessarily have to be dying in the battlefield as such, but even something as simple as just committing to war. And as long as that war was, the way he put it was that the wars have to be, they come from... they're not a matter of earthly contingent necessity, but a divine judgment, which would then manifest itself into the format of this war that men would then partake in, and it was the fact that blood was spilled wasn't a matter of something that took away from it, but something that actually charged it and gave it meaning.
Yeah, it becomes a divine drama at that point, and I think that's why he uses the strife between the Christians and the Muslims quite a bit, because it kind of sums it up that way in that that divine drama. And I think even just war as ecstatic and spiritual experience. I mean, you could find this in other authors that aren't necessarily cult, like Ernst Junger, Storm of Steel. His books are great, and he kind of saw it that way. You're kind of shocked into this different state just by participating and being exposed to these dreadful scenarios in combat, and then it's also kind of an alchemical process, because you've got to push yourself through that, obviously. I mean, you got to imagine how horrific some of those scenarios are, and not, just succumb to the terror and fear or flee, so obviously you're going to come out very changed, so.
Well, actually, this is the first I've mentioned this anywhere, but I'm actually writing a song about this for the next Trivex album. And it's actually in relation to the Iran-Iraq war. I've never written about anything like this before, but during the Iran-Iraq war, there basically, there was like some conflicts, like it was already building up, but then basically what happened was that Iraq made the initial first proper invasion, but then after Iran defeated them within, I think, 2-3 years or so it started at 1980, if I'm correct. After a few years, when Iran actually took the territory back, they decided to invade Iraq back, which was definitely, obviously, a questionable thing to do. And obviously part of what they wanted to do was to be able to spread their ideology and the Shiite way of thinking to Iraq, and basically gain further control of the Middle East. And they basically had an operation where the basically like the president at the time, under the supervision of the supreme leader, gave out the order for it, and they sent out, I believe, somewhere around the estimate of 150,000 soldiers, most of which comprised of not just young men but actual children, and then they basically, in order to clear the minefields, they would send the children first, and a lot of these children would not be holding any weaponry or anything. They would just run straight through to the minefields to make way for the military. And this, by the way, was an absolute disaster, because basically they all went and then they just had so many casualties, the invasion didn't work. But it's that thing of, I mean, try and think for a moment through the perspective of a 13-year-old child that's running straight through a minefield and watching his friends blow up to pieces right next to him. You know?
Yeah.
It's a hard thing.
Oh yeah. That's definitely gonna, change you in very dramatic ways.
Mm-hmm. But then also try and put it into perspective, of like, did they reach a level of divine ascendance, or did they just perish and turn into dust and become memory, or are the two the same thing?
Yeah, hard to say, really. So, but interesting perspectives to look at for sure, especially in regards to transcendence and transcendental modes. That there's not just one, there are many.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, I think, what's fucked about our world. Is like there is that little bit of I would say, very minuscule and comparably almost pathetic way, I actually relate to this thought process, in the sense that when me and the guys used to perform black metal in Iran, and obviously that was something that we knew we were risking our lives for, like the first show that we played in the amphitheater where they actually set the place on fire and stuff, like I was ready to go that day. I was only 16, but I was like, I thought it was the police that was breaking in, and when I saw the smoke, I thought, yeah, fuck it, I'm ready to go. And then turned out not to be, and I got to live. But then since that day, I've never been the same. And I do feel like, as men in general, there's something very powerful that happens, if you find yourself in a situation where you are at least forced to face your mortality, especially if done by choice. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And of course, I can't speak too much to that because I've never joined that. I've never been a part of the military or anything like that, and so I haven't been in, in too dire of a scenario. I've been in very few life or death scenarios that I can think of, but. I guess a macrocosm of that is I've certainly been in a lot of physical confrontations. So, nothing as dramatic as all that. But conceptually, I absolutely agree.
Yeah. And I think that, especially when we are younger, there's this thing of like, when you get older, and then, when you have the presence of a partner in your life, or like children and whatnot, it becomes, it's sort of like, you sort of care a bit more. But when you're younger, it's just kind of like, if I die, I die. Fuck it. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. Now you got to pick the hill you want to die on. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You got to pick your battles and be mindful of the other people in your life and those kind of things. But you also don't want to compromise any amount of virility. And there's certain things that you just absolutely have to stand up to. And that's becoming more and more apparent as time moves on. And I think that it's going to be harder to just lie low and keep your head low. Fuck it, don't. At that point, don't. There needs to be some kind of fucking pushback on whatever it is that you don't fucking believe in. Otherwise this shit's just going to fucking take over. So the world's going fucking mad, at such an alarming rate, and things have lost their way. Anything traditional is basically, out the fucking window almost at this point. So, if you got to be that last bastion, family or no, and still be the one that's fucking running at it, and fighting against it, then, what else can you do?
Listen, brother, I fucking hear you completely, because, I think that like I said to you earlier, I kind of pointed to this, where I said that, like, oh yeah, for the longest time I've been of the thought process of live and let live, but then now I'm kind of like, I'm not so sure about that. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and of course, depending on what we're applying that to, but I think as a general philosophy, this live and let live, that's how you're going to end up getting fucked, by whatever you let live. And so, sometimes it's live and let die, and sometimes it's like, it might seem harmless on the surface, but the next thing you know, these people are coming for you, or they're coming for your children, or they're coming for whatever it is, or they're all of a sudden there's laws that are being changed and ways of life that are will impact you. This live and let live idea doesn't mean that you're not going to be affected by it, and sometimes you got to fucking draw a line and say no. I think we're going to get there. I think unfortunately we're already seeing it. We're already seeing blood in the fucking streets, and I think that's where the world's moving.
There's a thing I want to talk to you about that. So the thing that's been in my mind quite a lot recently, and it's especially because I actually saw one of the protests in person, obviously, due to the whole conflict that's been happening in the Middle East, there's also been a lot of protests on this side, especially in Europe, and in the UK, it's been quite a lot of pro-Palestine marches, which there's a lot to be said about that. There's a lot to unpack there. I'm not interested in the thing of trying to justify one side or the other, and then pretend as if I'm some kind of history expert here and I understand certain things. I do understand and acknowledge that the killing of innocent civilians is something that should not really be happening. It doesn't matter whichever side it's on. But there's something about this whole thing that really concerns me. I don't know if you feel the same way about it, or if in your area you might have seen this the same way. But when I see those protests, even when you listen to some of the chants and the things that they're talking about, at first it always starts with ceasefire, which that sounds nice. It's like, oh, ceasefire, cool. And then it goes on to say, like, oh yeah, they're a terrorist state, they must be destroyed and everything. It's like, well, hang on, that's not ceasefire exactly, And then there's something at the core of it which concerns me, in that what we're seeing now may potentially, I could be wrong, I hope I am, but I see the potential for civil warfare within Europe when I see that.
Oh yeah, I think that potential already existed before this, but this exaggerates it even more. So,
yeah, and you can think of it from multiple different perspectives. Again, I don't think that it's even a matter of the who's right and who's wrong and this and that. It's a complicated situation. It's one of them situations where at one time one side is right and another time the other side is wrong, and then like blah blah blah, and it goes on. It's complicated. I've no interest in talking about that side of things, because it's something that we could be going in circles all fucking day about it. But the thing that I think we should be really careful with is to make sure that we don't shit where we eat over a conflict that's happening on the other side of the world, as selfish as that may sound.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's probably far too late for that. But I agree in general, as a general philosophy, Yeah, and I mean it's a tricky thing, because you're seeing shit like get so fucking turned around now, where you see Antifa screaming stuff, anti-Semitic stuff, and I'm like, what is going on here? Like, sometimes you just gotta stand back and just like shake your fucking head, like, this is why I believe it's called everything's fucking upside down. Just fucking however many months ago, like it was very, they were screaming the opposite, and it's just, and you see this on all sides, right? Like, just fucking total fucking madness. And now I guess everyone's canceled, because if you take one position, then you're fucking anti-Semitic. If you take the other, you're Islamophobic. And if you don't take either, then you're still something. They'll come up with something, So I guess everyone's canceled.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like I said, I got called a right-wing extremist for having worked with the vaccination line and received calls about people dying, and by expressing that online, that automatically made a presumption of where I stand politically, which I think is absolutely fascinating. Like I said, I've never heard it before, but here we are. So if we're just throwing shit around, then all right, whatever, throw whatever you want. Like it's like nothing has a meaning anymore. Like fuck it, whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, well, I couldn't fucking possibly begin to count how many times I've been called a right-wing extremist. It's like, I hear you.
Yeah. I'm only just joining the club, but
Well,
it's it's not one I ever expected I would be classed as, but obviously not that anyone, people say shit all the time, especially when they're behind their mobile phones, typing on their fucking damn screen keyboard or whatever, on a phone that was basically built by a phone that is basically a result of labor, of slave labor,
child labor. Yep.
Child labor in the fucking Congos, who are like fucking pulling the cobalt out with their fucking bare hands and inhaling all the toxic fumes. Yeah, sure, go and send your virtue signal on your social media and tell me how I'm a bad person for actually being concerned and wanting people who are responsible for the events of the last few years to actually be held accountable for it. But yeah, there we go. That's the fucking world we live in now. But and I want to kind of like just take a step out of this, and just on a more positive note, and just kind of take a, roll the wheel back a little bit back to where we were talking about the more spiritual side of things, and also our conversation in regards to the dead, or the ancestral dead in particular.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you, what is your in what way do you find any kind of spiritual improvement, or rather an improvement of your spiritual path, by embracing those who came before you and your lineage in particular? And the reason why I asked this question is I saw you post some pictures on your private Instagram of I believe, was it your grandparents or like maybe grandparents who were actually had just moved to America? And
yeah, it was both. Yeah, so both were included there. But great grandfather, whose name was actually Adolf Mann, so Adolphus. Yeah, not a popular name anymore. But,
not anymore, no.
Not anymore, no. But I think it's good to venerate the dead, and have remembrance for your bloodline and where you came from. I think that's just generally important as a spiritual practice. There are very specific spiritual practices to commune with the dead, or ask favors or ask advice. And I've got some good friends that are very involved in this. Like I even have a old bandmate who said that he put out, I can't remember if it was like cigars. It was like his grandfather's favorite cigars on certain nights, and left him, feels like a very Greek thing. Probably not just Greek, but the offerings. It's almost like the old offerings of like milk and honey, for the dead.
Sure. Same as a lot of Indian traditions as well, I guess.
Yeah, and asking, whether it's asking for advice or assistance, or just venerating them. And I try to do that in small ways. So I believe I did that on Samhain. That's when I had posted those. Just of course that's a very small gesture. Is not quite the same when you're just posting on social media some old photos. But no, I do think in general it's you want to remember who came before you, and your bloodline and your lineage and all those things. I think those are important. And then of course, you've got the concept of the mighty dead, the ancestral dead. I see that more as maybe less as a literal, in that their spirits are hanging out, as we were talking about before, in a self-aware fashion, floating through the ether, observing you. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm totally fucking wrong on this. Actually, me and the same band member had in Sweden years and years ago, we were at a bar talking about this, and it was pretty funny because he was telling me that he did this, and he's like my grandfather. He was very close to his grandfather, and he said, he does give me advice when I need it. I put out the offerings, and of course I go down my fucking literary esoteric rabbit hole on well, Guinan says this, it can't be that. And he's like, I don't give a fuck what Guinan says. He's like, this works. And if it works, it works, which I totally appreciate. And I totally agree with, if it works, it fucking works, and why split hairs at that fucking point. But yeah, anyhow, in general, yeah, I think it's definitely crucial to honor and remember your forefathers. So.
Very interesting that. Yeah, like you said earlier, if it works, it works, So, like, for example, as we mentioned, whether it's a psychological thing, or whether it's a divine thing, it almost doesn't matter, because you're still having the experience, so there's not much point trying to put it under any kind of label, and I guess that's a pretty interesting anecdote to know about, at least. I certainly feel like there's definitely at the very least, I think, an element of protection sometimes that, like
Sure.
You go through life and some shit happens and then you're like, well, I should have never made it past that, but here I am. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and just to clarify, like my argument in that scenario with my old bandmate wasn't that it was necessarily psychological. I still think it's magical or esoteric. And then again, we get into splitting hairs. I'm just like going into very specifics. Is that the actual ghost? And then we have to define ghosts, like something that is still individuated and self-aware, like that's hanging out in this liminal beyond death, or is it maybe, I don't know, something more of a stream of consciousness that conjoins with the ancestors, or various just concepts on that. And that's really, that's why I said at that point we're splitting hairs, because it's obviously has a spiritual value, esoteric activation, whatever that is. And so who am I to question it? I don't even think it really matters at that point, so
Yeah. One thing about the whole idea of paying attention and paying homage to your own lineage, in my eyes, is the idea of understanding where you have come from. Okay, now let me unpack that here. Yeah, if you think about it, yes, we live in the modern world and we've got all this technology and all this bullshit, which is on one hand fucking amazing. On another hand, it definitely has its downsides. I think one of the biggest downsides of today's world and the way in which the ego is perceived and also projected is that we are all just individuals on our own. And we're not groups or communities anymore. And this is, there's power. Yeah. There is power in individualism. There is power in being independent, but then there's also power in community. And a part of, and that community can be family. And families, you can look at it like this. Yeah, maybe the last 50 years you've had air conditioning, but what about the however many thousands, if not millions of years before that, right? And then you think of the suffering and the horrible fucking times that the people who came before us have had to go through just to survive, just to pass on their genes, just for you to be sat here breathing, looking around you, to be listening to this conversation, and for you to actually kind of forget, and almost be ungrateful and almost be a lot of times anti-life. In a way, and I think that's a crazy thing to me. It's one thing that, and again, that's where the value of the traditional aspects of human living also come into play, whether it's the nuclear family or whether it's the just pure discipline, and things like that, and what's life is certain, having the masculine and the feminine playing the roles appropriately in accordance with nature, not what we made up for ourselves. I think that's where it becomes interesting. But also, on top of that, I think there is a spiritual element to this as well. That if you really want to progress in your own spirituality, yes, you can carve your own path, but there's all of this length of history that's come behind you as well. So why not try and explore that?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, the destruction of all that, what you said, where it seems like there's a push for everyone just to be kind of their own individual on their own and forget what came before. That's a very popular thing now. I mean, I see it all the time, especially with, propaganda that you're, to the point that people start loathing their own bloodline, their own race, their own culture, or they're told they don't have a culture, or they're told that they do have a culture, but it's very negative. And people fucking eat this shit up. They just fucking eat it up, and because it's pushed with such a hardcore agenda through stuff like social media and just media in general. And I think that it just makes, why would they do that? It just makes you more malleable and makes you more controllable, So I think that's really the point. And that's, really ends up being the flashpoint between cultures at this point is because of these fucking poisonous narratives. So
it's like that weird fucking thing that was on ChatGPT. I don't know if they fixed this since then or not, or if you have seen this, but it was basically the idea that if you ask it, oh, I'm a white person, should I be proud of who I am? It would say, no, you didn't choose your race or gender, you shouldn't be proud of who you are at all. It's nothing you had any control over. And then if you say, I'm a black person, should I be proud of who I am? It would say, yeah, diversity is a great thing, you should be very proud of who you are. And it's like, that's really fucking weird.
Yeah. Well, I mean, someone wrote that algorithm, so yeah.
Yeah. And obviously, like the point of it is that I think regardless of who you are, you should be proud of who you are, first of all, where you come from. You should be proud of that. Yeah. And then you should also be proud of who you are as an individual, but also make sure that you're earning that pride and not just saying it because of which colored semen you fucking came from, basically,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you owe it to your ancestor and your culture to carry that on, to be proud of it, to live up to the achievements. So
exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, again, take affirmative action, use discipline and do things in your life, accomplish what it is that you want to accomplish. But also equally don't hide behind something like that either. Like a lot of people are just fucking losers. They've never done a thing in their life, other than just fail and whinge and never really take any chances. Yet, because of the race that they are, whether it's black or white or whatever, they claim that superiority over other people, even though they've never really done anything for themselves in their life. And that's something I have absolutely no respect for.
Sure. Or even just on a personal level, like, or just, individualistic level, like, the people that never have done anything are the ones with the loudest fucking voices attacking everyone else.
Right. Yes. Yeah. That's always the fucking culprit, isn't it? I think that's the thing we're dealing with. Yes, exactly. Which I think you kind of had to deal with a little bit of that as well, from what we know.
Yeah, I've dealt with it for a good 15 years plus. So yeah, you get used to that. The best tactic with these motherfuckers is you just fucking sit there and smile. Mm-hmm. Don't engage. Just give them a grin, and they'll stick. Some of these motherfuckers will stick around for years, and they'll post all over your shit, and you just fucking grin at it. Don't engage. Mm-hmm. That's what they want. So
yeah. I remember seeing some of that at the, I think it was the Maryland Death Fest forum.
Yeah, that one was at least entertaining because it got so fucking just out of hand and wild. So it was actually pretty funny to go through.
Yeah,
a lot of pretty hilarious material
I
on there?
honestly, obviously, like quite a bit of time has gone past since then. I think that was just after the last time you came on, and I purposely signed up to it just because I was having a nosy. I was trying to read what was
Yeah.
going on,
No, it's
and
entertaining as fuck.
it was crazy. Like people were like,
Yeah.
basically saying like actually provoking violence. People who clearly have probably never been in like a fist fight or anything in their life. Like not that that's necessarily like a term of endearment anyway, but people who don't understand the value of life basically is what I'm saying. And then going around saying like, oh yeah, if we see you at this tent so and so, we're gonna come beat you up. It's like, what the fuck is wrong with you guys? Like, have you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very strange.
I've gotten quite a bit of that over the years. So, and then it's always funny when I go and like look at the individual's photo, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah. yeah. I've seen quite a few of them. I don't want to be making any examples here because But you know
Sure.
what I'll say is this, man. Then fuck the noise, right? Because there will be people who will just always make their own presumptions about things. They'll make their own presumptions about what you think, about what's inside your head, which to me is already an extremely Orwellian situation. Like, what the fuck do you care what I think about something? Why not pay attention to what I'm actually doing, right? And I think that... the whole thing, it doesn't hold any water. When I get those things, that was only like a mild interaction, in a comment section on a celebrity's post. But even when I get stuff like that, I don't take it personally. If someone calls me a right-wing extremist, I don't care because they're not going to define what I believe in, but what I believe in by giving me a random fucking label that obviously does not apply. It's not applicable. But I'm also not going to take it personally. I'm going to be like, well, obviously this person's a fucking moron, and clearly they don't know me. They've never met me in person. They've not had a conversation with me. They don't know what I believe in. And I think it's the same for you guys as well. When you have a band, top tier band, like really, I would say that Akhlys in particular, I would say is probably the best produce of the USA in black metal, at least in the last decade. Okay, and I'm not just saying that because you're here, but I genuinely believe that, after seeing the shows, after obviously especially the last album or even the Dreamy Night, really just fucking terrific stuff, and you've never ever once released anything with the band that's been even like remotely political, and for people to just target you because you once like quoted Jordan Peterson, who by the way sat down with Netanyahu on your Twitter or whatever, it's like it's fucking stupid, like, so power to you, and like I said, fuck the noise.
They're not gonna, no one's gonna dictate to me on how I proceed in my own life, especially with my own views or politics or anything like that. Fuck them, they can try, but good fucking luck. So, and as far as being called a fucking right-wing extremist, hey, as long as I'm not being called a fucking Marxist, then I'm doing it right.
Yeah, because you would, Marxism, you would think is pretty bad considering how much of anti-Semite he was, right?
Oh yeah. It's they no one ever touches on that one, so yeah.
There we go, man. Listen, Kyle, what a fucking pleasure it's been to have you on here, man. As we're kind of wrapping things up, is there any more details you want to share with us about the upcoming album?
Well, I don't know if I have a whole lot to share other than I already did at this time. We got the fucking we got the artwork nailed down, so that's fucking awesome. Right. And who's actually going to be the main artwork is Agostino Aravabin, and again, I'm not totally positive if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but very, very well-known and fine art painter of kind of like the abstract. Very cool. So I was really excited. Are you familiar with him?
I am not. No, I mean the name rings a bell, but I'm not picturing any style of artwork in front of me right now. But I would love to see his work.
If you looked it up, you'll probably recognize some of it. So,
Sure.
Yeah,
excuse if my reaction's not like, holy shit, I don't recognize him immediately at this moment in time, but I'm sure once this podcast is done, I'll check it out and I'll recognize it.
I was very lucky to get in contact with him through my friend Daniel Valeriani. Actually put us in contact, and it was a really random thing because I like just on a whim, I was like, I realized like once I got into this guy, it's like this guy is like doing major art showings of his paintings in like cathedrals across Europe and major museums and stuff. And so I was like, yeah, there's probably no way in fucking hell. I shot a couple emails off and never heard back. And then I just happened to through my friend who happens to know him very well, connected, and then he wanted to, before he agreed, he wanted to know what we're about, and he doesn't really have much to do with the black metal or metal world at all. And then next thing I know, we're going down the rabbit hole on Platonism, and alchemy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So then we really had some good conversation, and he was like, yeah, you can do this. And so we're going to have some incredibly unique and amazing artwork on there. And then
that's awesome, man. I can't wait to actually see that. And by the way, since you mentioned him, shout out to Daniel as well, because he's truly a fantastic artist as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then Jose Sabogo, good friend of mine, just done art for me before. He's going to be doing he's done 4 incredible pieces that'll be like, the inner art. And so we're pulling together all kinds of stuff for this, and it's really coming together really fucking well. And, I started writing for this approximately 2 years ago, which is crazy. And so it's just taken me all this fucking time to get to this point. And I'm still like, hurrying to put on all the last finishes. I still have to do all the fucking lyrics and the vocals and, in a short amount of time. So, but I find this is always where I land, and I seem to work the best with, the fire lit under my ass. So that's where I'm at right now. But the majority of the music is written, and that's the biggest part. So yeah, we should be, wrapping that one up, and I can't say a whole lot on this now, but we'll be back in Europe come summer.
That's fucking awesome, man. I can't wait to see more of this. I may have heard some like brief demos of it before, but I can't wait.
I've got some updated ones I'll send your way that I'm pretty stoked on. So
I would fucking love to hear it, man. Fuck yeah. I mean, just based on the concept alone, I am so excited to hear this, and then you're so good at like pulling off these, like just taking it further than just music. And I'm very, very stoked for this one. If you were to obviously you'll let the music do the talking whenever it comes out, but if you want to give us at least some short comparison to what it's like compared to Melano, I mean, where would you place it?
There's definitely going to be elements of it. I think in some regards it may be a little bit darker, a little bit more aggressive. There's going to be parts where you're going to see that, and then all of a sudden in other areas you're going to see almost like a kind of homages to stuff that you'd find more on the Dreaming Eye, more like the dreamy atmosphere type stuff, but then and all kinds of stuff in between. Very lengthy songs, but that's nothing new for us. But there's a lot going on in this. At the end of the day, it looks like it's shaping up to be 6 songs. Within that 6 songs, there's a lot to it. So.
Awesome, man. That sounds fucking excellent. And I cannot wait to hear it. So listen, man, thank you so much again for coming on to the podcast. I really appreciate you. I appreciate you as a friend. I appreciate you as an artist, and as someone who's not afraid to speak their mind. And I very much appreciate the vision that you put out there into the world, regardless of how nightmarish it might be. In fact, that's the part that I do appreciate about it. But man, all my respect to you and the rest of your band as well. Like the Evan, Josh, Dustin, those guys are fucking really, really cool. And it's been great to spend some time, and hopefully we'll share the stage again at some point in the not so distant future.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely, man. And to everyone else listening to the podcast as well, hope you enjoyed this one. We'll see you on the next episode of Iblis Manifestations. Cheers.